there's been growing attention to a recent message from the Vatican, one that has left many asking a surprising question. Is the Catholic Church being called to return to the spiritual roots of Orthodoxy? While no formal shift has been announced, some statements from Pope Leo have sparked renewed curiosity and conversation. In an address to Eastern Catholic communities, the Pope highlighted the need for the Western Church to rediscover what he called a sense of mystery and beauty in its liturgical life. He pointed specifically to the Eastern traditions, urging that the West learn from their spiritual depth and contemplative approach. He also warned against what he described as spectacle and consumerism creeping into the way liturgies are celebrated in the West. But that wasn't all. He also emphasized a renewed focus on synodality, a model of church governance rooted in the early centuries of Christianity, and still practiced among Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox churches today. This model prioritizes local councils of bishops working in communion, rather than centralized top-down control. The remarks have led many to reflect. Could these be signs of a deeper effort to heal divisions between East and West? And what does this mean for the future of the Church's liturgy and spiritual direction? What's even more surprising is that this renewed focus on the East isn't just a modern development or a passing ecumenical gesture. It's a revival of something much older. More than a century ago, Pope Leo XIII issued a powerful directive that Eastern Catholic traditions were not only to be respected but actively protected. He went so far as to declare that any Latin rite clergy who attempted to draw Eastern Catholics away from their own rites should be removed from office. That strong stance, once considered rare, is now being echoed by Pope Leo, who has brought the same principle back to the heart of the Church's mission. In a recent Vatican document, he reaffirmed that preserving Eastern rites is more important than many realize, especially for those living in diaspora. The statement is clear. The Eastern churches must not be assimilated or sidelined, but upheld as essential expressions of the Church's richness. This represents a dramatic shift in tone compared to past eras, when attitudes toward the East were often marked by tension and dominance. But even before the reforms of Vatican Roman II, Pope Leo XIII had already opened a different path, one that Pope Leo is now walking more deliberately. The document also emphasizes the need to create and support Eastern jurisdictions wherever possible, and to build greater awareness among Latin Catholics. This is not about blending traditions into one. It's about learning from each other, recognizing that the full life of the Church can only breathe fully when both lungs, East and West, are honored. The message coming from Pope Leo is clear. The Church thrives when it honors both its Eastern and Western heritage. His vision calls for mutual enrichment, not through artificial blending, but through genuine understanding and respect for each tradition's unique contribution. In his recent address, Pope Leo specifically asked the dicastery for the Eastern churches to help establish clear principles and guidelines. The goal is simple but profound: to ensure that Latin bishops actively support Eastern Catholics living outside their homelands, helping them preserve their spiritual identity and allowing their traditions to flourish wherever they are. This is seen not as a threat to unity, but as a strength, a witness that can inspire and enrich the broader Church. It signals a renewed desire for unity, not uniformity, built on dialogue and a shared love for the sacred. But alongside this renewed appreciation for Eastern spirituality comes another significant theme: synodality. The term itself often stirs passionate reactions. In some circles, especially among traditionalist communities in the West, the concept of synodality is met with hesitation, sometimes due to concerns over its meaning or the perceived role of lay involvement in church governance. So where does Pope Leo stand on this? Is his vision aligned with Pope Francis's push for a more synodal church? Or is there something more deeply rooted in tradition at work here? A key question now emerges. Is the Pope signaling a shift toward greater local governance, where decisions are made more by local synods and bishops, rather than relying exclusively on centralized authority from Rome? And if so, could this model support more diversity in liturgical expression, including greater freedom for Latin Mass communities? The idea may seem new to some, but it's actually rooted in the Church's earliest traditions. The current emphasis on synodality, championed previously by Pope Francis, is now being carried forward with clarity by Pope Leo. He reaffirms that the Eastern churches must be valued not only for their ancient liturgies, but also for their deep theological insights and distinctive approach to communal discernment. In the first centuries of Christianity, local synods and regional councils were the primary way the Church governed itself. Bishops led their own communities while remaining in communion with one another. And in that structure, the Bishop of Rome held a unique role, a place of honor and unity, without yet exercising the kind of administrative control that would later define the centralized papacy of the medieval period. This historical model is one that both Catholics and Eastern Orthodox Christians often recognize. While perspectives may differ, especially regarding Rome's authority to intervene, the foundational concept of local governance in communion remains a shared legacy. What Pope Leo appears to be doing is not erasing the primacy of Rome, but rather restoring balance, emphasizing communion, subsidiarity, and mutual respect within the global Church. To understand today's conversations about synodality and decentralization, it's important to look at how the role of the papacy evolved over time. By the High Middle Ages, the papacy had become one of the most powerful institutions in Europe, exerting influence not only over church governance, but even over kings and councils. Pope Innocent III famously asserted authority that extended into both spiritual and temporal realms. The Gregorian reforms only deepened this centralization, strengthening Rome's control over bishops and setting the stage for the papal court, the Roman Curia, to become the central administrative hub of the entire church. This system brought structure, especially in times of division and doctrinal confusion. During moments of crisis, centralized leadership provided clarity and unity. But it also came with a cost. Local traditions were often overshadowed and liturgical diversity began to narrow. The Council of Trent, for instance, abolished many ancient Western rites, streamlining them into what became the singular Roman Rite, as a response to the Protestant Reformation. This historical reality raises a valid question. How does this square with the idea of local autonomy or synodal decision-making today, especially under the teachings of Vatican I, which affirms papal primacy? The answer may lie not in contradiction, but in adaptation. Vatican I defined the Pope's universal authority, but it did not dictate a uniform method of exercising that authority. Returning to a more synodal structure, where bishops play a greater local role, doesn't necessarily undo papal supremacy. It simply reframes how the papacy leads, as a source of unity, not uniformity. Rather than a retreat from established doctrine, a move toward greater synodality could be seen as an act of prudence, a pastoral shift, not a theological reversal. The core dogmas of the Church, including papal primacy as defined by Vatican I, remain intact. But how that primacy is exercised could evolve, especially in ways that foster dialogue and unity with the Eastern churches. The question remains, could this more collaborative model be enough to invite the Eastern Orthodox back into closer communion with Rome? Or does the issue of papal authority remain a barrier? Historically, many Eastern Orthodox theologians have acknowledged the special role of the Bishop of Rome, viewing it not as an invention of later centuries, but as a historical reality. One widely respected voice, Metropolitan Callistos Ware, spoke of Roman primacy not as a problem in itself, but in how it was understood and applied. He suggested that the Pope could be seen as a servant of unity, not as a unilateral ruler, but as the first among equals, a primacy of love exercised within a synodal church. This framing presents synodality not as a threat to Rome's role, but as an opportunity to return to the spirit of the first millennium, a time when the church breathed more freely through local governance, united by shared faith rather than centralized control. Liturgically, such a shift could be transformative. A synodal church would empower local bishops to respond more thoughtfully to the needs of their communities. This could include greater flexibility in language, posture, chant, and the revival of forgotten liturgical customs. Instead of imposing a single, global template, the church could once again cultivate organic, locally rooted expressions of worship, just as it did in the early centuries and continues to do in the East. There are clear benefits to a more synodal and localized approach to church governance, especially when it comes to the liturgy. One major advantage is greater pastoral and cultural sensitivity. When local bishops are empowered to shape liturgical life in response to their communities, the result is often a deeper sense of connection between the faithful and the sacred rites. We've already seen glimpses of this in Latin Mass communities, where the preservation of local customs has fostered strong spiritual identity. Another benefit is the potential revival of liturgical traditions that were lost or suppressed over time, such as the Mozarabic rite in Spain, the Sarum rite in England, or various local Marian feasts that once flourished in specific regions. These rich expressions of worship, rooted in history and culture, can offer a sense of beauty and belonging that transcends uniformity. A decentralized model may also encourage greater lay participation. When a liturgy reflects the life of the people, they're more likely to feel ownership of it, not as something distant or imposed, but as something they truly live and celebrate. But alongside these strengths come challenges. A major concern is the potential loss of liturgical unity. Without careful oversight, decentralization could open the door to fragmentation, or worse, the rise of ideological or nationalistic distortions of the liturgy. History has shown this risk in various contexts, from splintered movements in Eastern Christianity to hyper-partisan tensions within some traditionalist Latin Mass circles today. Another danger is that the liturgy could become a battleground for theological agendas, rather than a place of unity and worship. When communities prioritize innovation or resistance over reverence and communion, the result is often confusion and division. Still, these are not reasons to avoid reform, but reminders that any path forward must be walked with discernment. And for many, the most pressing question remains: what does this mean for the Latin Mass? Is Pope Leo preparing to lift restrictions? Could we see new permissions granted? Might the traditional liturgy be welcomed more broadly once again? Let's take a closer look at where things might be heading. So, what does all of this mean for the Latin Mass? Is it about to return in full? Will it be more widely celebrated? Could Pope Leo himself eventually offer the traditional Latin liturgy? At this stage, there are no definitive answers, but the tone of recent documents has raised important questions. One line in particular stands out: the Church needs you. The contribution that the Christian East can offer us today is immense. This statement reflects a deeper theme. The West has something to learn. It's not a declaration of failure, but a humble recognition that something essential has been preserved in the East, especially in its liturgy. The document continues, expressing the Church's great need to recover the sense of mystery found in Eastern worship. Liturgies that fully engage the human person, that sing of the beauty of salvation, and that awaken awe before the divine. This recovery of mystagogy, the ancient practice of leading the faithful into the mystery of God, is not merely about form. It's about substance. And that's where the conversation about the Latin Mass re-enters the picture. Many have interpreted these papal reflections as an implicit affirmation of more traditional liturgical practices, those that embody mystery, silence, reverence, and transcendence. While not a direct endorsement of the Tridentine liturgy, the language certainly resonates with what the Latin Mass has long represented for its supporters. The document goes on to highlight spiritual practices deeply rooted in Eastern Christianity. Constant intercession, penance, fasting, and even weeping for the sins of the world. It speaks to a spirituality not defined by convenience or minimalism, but by immersion and transformation. Finally, there's a clear caution against diluting tradition in the name of practicality. Preserve your traditions, it says, without attenuating them, lest they be corrupted by the mentality of consumerism and utilitarianism. This message is unmistakable. Reverence, mystery, and sacred continuity are not optional, they are essential. And as the Church looks eastward for inspiration, many are asking if this signals a broader return to depth, beauty, and timeless worship in the West as well. It's understandable why some interpret the Pope's recent words as a call to restore the Latin Mass. After all, the traditional liturgy is undeniably rich in mystery, solemnity, and a sense of the sacred that seems to transcend time. And in many ways, it does resonate with the spirit of the East, particularly in its reverence, stillness, and transcendence. But perhaps that interpretation, while valid, is too narrow. When you step back and view the broader context of Pope Leo's message, it doesn't read as a mandate to recover a specific form. Rather, it feels more like an invitation to rediscover the interior spirit that Eastern Christians have preserved so vividly for centuries. A spirit that could, in time, inspire a renewal of the liturgy in the West as well, not necessarily by returning to the past, but by reawakening the soul of worship. This brings up a deeper question. Is embracing the Latin Mass the same thing as learning from the East? To some degree, yes. Both traditions emphasize transcendence, reverence, and a liturgical posture that orients the heart toward God. Yet there's more at stake here than form alone. Pope Leo seems to be pointing us not just toward external expressions, but toward a way of thinking, a mindset. In Eastern Christianity, there's a concept known as phronema, a word that refers to an inner disposition, a spiritual attitude. It's a kind of lens through which one views worship, theology, and even daily life. The Latin Mass, for all its beauty, emerged from a different mindset, one shaped by medieval Western theology, precision, and a need to clearly define and defend the faith during times of controversy and reform. That mindset had its place. It shaped a liturgy that brought clarity and consistency in an age of challenge. But today, the call may be different. The East offers a more immersive liturgical experience, one that engages the senses, emotions, and soul. It's less concerned with formula and more focused on transformation. The divine liturgy isn't just heard, it's lived. It doesn't explain mystery, it enters into it. None of this is to diminish the Latin tradition. Rather, it's a call to rediscover the heart of the liturgy, one that only truly comes alive when it flows from a deep spiritual life. The Church Fathers made this clear. Liturgy is the expression of the soul's relationship with God. Without that interior life, even the most ancient forms can become hollow. The question is not whether one rite is better than another, but whether our spiritual foundation is deep enough to sustain the beauty we seek. What Pope Leo appears to be calling for is not merely a return to rubrics or external structures, but something far more foundational, a recovery of the Church's interior spirituality. At the heart of this renewal lies a vision rooted in the early Church and echoed throughout the Eastern tradition. A liturgy shaped by mystery, humility, and sacred trust. This means returning to a more iconographic and incarnational understanding of Christ, not just in art or language, but in the way we pray, fast, sing, and worship. In Eastern Christianity, there is a clear willingness to submit the intellect to the mystery of God, allowing the liturgy to form the soul, rather than trying to explain every aspect of it. It's a holistic experience, immersive, contemplative, and deeply reverent. One particularly striking line in Pope Leo's document calls for the preservation of traditions, without attenuating them for the sake of practicality or convenience, lest they be corrupted by the mentality of consumerism and utilitarianism. It's language that some interpret as a critique of modern liturgical abuses, rushed celebrations, commercialized music, or a utilitarian mindset that reduces the Mass to a brief weekly obligation. And these are real concerns worth addressing. But there's another layer to this conversation. Consider the traditional low Mass. Fully valid and deeply prayerful, it's often quiet, brief, and minimalist, sometimes lasting under 30 minutes. Ironically, this very style was once criticized for being too functional, leading to reforms in the 20th century that sought to encourage fuller, more active participation. The concern then was that liturgy had become overly silent, lacking communal depth and richness. Even today, many first-time attendees of the low mass can feel disoriented. Without audible prayers or music, it can seem difficult to follow, especially without prior formation. Still, many find in it a powerful stillness and contemplative beauty. In contrast, Eastern liturgies, and pre-medieval Western ones, were never designed for brevity. They were communal, rich in symbolism, and often lengthy. In fact, some Eastern churches still celebrate liturgies that last many hours, fully engaging the community in prayer, song, and sacred rhythm. The point here is not to debate one form against another. Rather, it's to recognize what Pope Leo is really highlighting: a call to rediscover depth, reverence, and sacred time, where worship is not rushed, and the focus is not efficiency, but encounter. There have even been quiet rumors, unconfirmed, that Pope Leo may have celebrated the traditional Latin Mass in private, and perhaps even the Novus Ordo in Latin. If true, it would signal a notable gesture, but one that remains consistent with his broader vision. Not a retreat into the past, but a renewal of the sacred in whatever form the liturgy takes. It's also worth remembering that many Eastern leaders today, both Catholic and Orthodox, support the use of vernacular language in worship. One influential voice during the Second Vatican Council was Patriarch Maximos Roman IV of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church. He championed the use of the people's language in liturgical celebrations, reminding the Council that Christ himself celebrated the first Eucharist in the language of the people. His point was simple but profound. For worship to transform, it must be both accessible and transcendent, rooted in mystery, yet spoken to the heart. Patriarch Maximos Roman IV, one of the most influential Eastern Catholic voices during the Second Vatican Council, offered a compelling reflection on language in the liturgy. He reminded the Church that the early Christians worshipped in languages understood by the people: Aramaic, Greek, and Latin, all of which were vernacular in their own time. He questioned the idea of retaining Latin in the Roman Rite when it no longer served as a bridge to participation, but instead became a barrier. As he pointed out, Christ celebrated the first Eucharist in Aramaic, a language his disciples could understand. It would have never occurred to the apostles, he said, that sacred scripture should be read, psalms sung, or bread broken in a language foreign to the assembled faithful. This perspective played a major role in the Council's decision to permit the use of vernacular languages in the liturgy, a move aimed at making the Mass more spiritually enriching and accessible to the people. Where things go from here is still unfolding. The current emphasis on synodality suggests a gradual return to localized decision-making, a kind of rebalancing where bishops and communities discern what best serves the faithful in their unique contexts. In this framework, we may not see a single solution imposed universally, but rather a diversity of approaches that honor both tradition and pastoral wisdom. And in many ways, this may be exactly what the Church needs right now: a chance to breathe again with both lungs. Pope Leo continues to surprise, often in ways that are subtle, thoughtful, and rooted in continuity rather than disruption. Whether that includes a greater role for Latin in the liturgy or a deeper embrace of the Eastern spiritual mindset, one thing is becoming clear: the Church is being invited to recover its heart, its depth, and its unity through mystery.